11-year-old Jaycee Dugard was walking to her school bus stop on a quiet mountain road when a car pulled up beside her and two strangers changed her life forever. But 18 years later, a parole officer conducting a routine visit notices something strange about two young girls playing in a backyard and asks a simple question that leads to one of the most shocking discoveries in criminal history, revealing that a little girl who had been given up for dead had not only survived nearly 2 decades of captivity, but had given birth to two children who had never seen the outside world. South Lake Tahoe, California, in 1991, was a place where children still walked to school without fear, where parents trusted their communities, and where the greatest danger most families worried about was the occasional black bear wandering down from the mountains. The area was known for its stunning natural beauty, with crystal-clear lake waters surrounded by towering pine trees and snow-capped peaks that attracted tourists from around the world. Jaycee Lee Dugard was everything you would expect from an 11-year-old girl living in this mountain paradise. She had long blonde hair that caught the sunlight, bright blue eyes that sparkled with curiosity, and the kind of innocent smile that made adults remember why they loved children. She was in the 5th grade at Myers Elementary School, where she was known as a quiet, well-behaved student who loved reading and spending time with her friends. Jaycee lived with her mother, Terry Probin, and her stepfather, Carl Probin, in a modest home on Washawan Boulevard in the Myers area of South Lake Tahoe. The family had moved to this peaceful mountain community, seeking the kind of safe, wholesome environment where children could grow up surrounded by nature and strong community values. Terry Probin was a young mother who had worked hard to build a stable life for her daughter. She had married Carl when Jaycee was young, and he had embraced his role as a stepfather with genuine love and dedication. The family dynamic was warm and supportive, with both parents committed to giving Jaycee every opportunity to succeed and grow into a confident, capable young woman. Carl Probin worked as a self-employed contractor, taking on various construction and maintenance projects throughout the Lake Tahoe area. His work schedule was flexible enough to allow him to be present for important moments in Jaycee's life, and he took his responsibilities as a father figure seriously. He was protective of Jaycee without being overbearing, understanding that an 11-year-old girl needed both security and independence. The Probin family's daily routine was typical of many working families in small mountain communities. Terry would prepare breakfast while Carl got ready for work, and Jaycee would gather her school supplies and prepare for another day of learning and friendship. The school bus stop was only a short walk from their home, along a quiet residential street where neighbors knew each other and watched out for one another's children. Jaycee's walk to the bus stop each morning was a journey she had made countless times without incident. The route took her along Washawan Boulevard, past familiar houses where she knew the residents, past the same landmarks she had been seeing for years. It was the kind of routine that creates a sense of security and normalcy, allowing both parents and children to feel confident about daily activities. What the Probin family could not have known was that their peaceful community had attracted the attention of one of the most dangerous predators in California history. Philip Craig Garrido was a registered sex offender who had been living in nearby Antioch, but he had been scouting the Lake Tahoe area for months, looking for the perfect opportunity to commit a crime that would satisfy his twisted desires. Garrido was not a random criminal or an opportunistic predator. He was a methodical, calculating individual who had spent considerable time planning his next crime. He had been convicted of rape in 1976 and had served 11 years in federal prison, but his time behind bars had not rehabilitated him. Instead, he had spent those years fantasizing about future crimes and developing elaborate plans for kidnapping and sexual assault. After his release from prison, Garrido had married Nancy Bocanegra, a woman who would become his accomplice in the most heinous crime imaginable. Nancy was a troubled individual who had become completely dependent on Garrido's domination and control. She had abandoned her own moral compass and sense of right and wrong, becoming a willing participant in her husband's criminal schemes. Together, Garrido and Nancy had spent months preparing for a kidnapping. They had scouted various locations throughout Northern California, looking for the perfect victim and the ideal circumstances to commit their crime without being caught. They had modified their car to make it suitable for transporting a kidnapped child, and they had prepared a hidden compound on their property where they planned to hold their victim. The compound that Garrido had constructed behind his home in Antioch was a testament to his premeditated intentions. Hidden from view behind fences and tarps, he had built a series of sheds and tents where he planned to hold his captive. The compound was equipped with generators for electricity, primitive bathroom facilities, and sleeping areas that revealed the long-term nature of his plans. Garrido had also developed an elaborate system of psychological control that he planned to use on his victim. He had studied techniques of manipulation and indoctrination, and he had created a twisted religious philosophy that he would use to justify his actions and maintain control over his captive. This was not a crime of passion or opportunity. It was a carefully planned and methodically executed crime that had been in development for months. The choice of Jaycee as a victim was not random, but it was not based on any personal connection or prior knowledge of her routine. Garrido had been driving through the Lake Tahoe area when he spotted her walking alone to the bus stop, and something about her appearance and vulnerability triggered his predatory instincts. He began following her routine, learning when she walked to school and identifying the perfect location for an abduction. Jaycee, meanwhile, was completely unaware that she had become the target of such an elaborate criminal plan. She was focused on typical 11-year-old concerns, her schoolwork, her friendships, and her plans for the weekend. Her biggest worries were probably about an upcoming test, or whether her friends would like her new outfit, not the possibility that a predator was planning to destroy her life. The morning of June 10th, 1991 started like any other day for the Probyn family. Terry prepared breakfast, Carl got ready for work, and Jaycee gathered her school supplies for another day at Myers Elementary. The weather was beautiful, with clear skies, and the kind of crisp mountain air that made living in Lake Tahoe feel like a privilege. Jaycee kissed her parents goodbye and headed out for her walk to the bus stop, carrying her backpack and wearing the kind of casual clothes that 11-year-old girls wore to school in the early 1990s. She had no way of knowing that this would be the last normal morning of her childhood, or that the next 18 years of her life would be spent in captivity, completely cut off from the world she had known. As Jaycee walked along the familiar route to her bus stop, Garrido and Nancy were already in position, waiting in their modified car for the perfect moment to execute their plan. They had studied her routine carefully, and they knew exactly when and where she would be most vulnerable to their attack. The stage was set for a confrontation between innocence and evil that would change multiple lives forever. Jaycee's strength, intelligence, and will to survive were about to be tested in ways that no child should ever have to endure, but her journey through the next 18 years would demonstrate the incredible resilience of the human spirit, even in the face of unimaginable horror. The morning of June 10th, 1991, seemed like any other school day, as Jaycee Dugard walked along Washoan Boulevard toward her bus stop. The mountain air was crisp and clean, the sun was shining through the towering pine trees, and the peaceful sounds of the Lake Tahoe morning created the perfect backdrop for what should have been another ordinary day in the life of an 11-year-old girl. Carl Probyn was following his usual morning routine, getting ready for work while keeping an eye on the time to make sure Jaycee would not miss her bus. Through the window of their home, he could see her walking down the street, her blonde hair catching the sunlight as she made her way toward the bus stop with the confident stride of a child who had made this journey hundreds of times before. But this morning was different from all the others. Though neither Jaycee nor her family had any way of knowing what was about to happen. Philip Garrido and Nancy Bocanegra had been waiting in their car, watching for the perfect moment to execute the plan they had been developing for months. They had studied Jaycee's routine, identified the most vulnerable point in her walk to school, and prepared for a crime that would destroy her childhood and haunt her family for nearly 2 decades. As Jaycee approached the area where she would normally catch her bus, a grey sedan pulled up beside her. The car moved slowly, matching her walking pace, and the occupants called out to her in a friendly tone that was designed to put her at ease. Like most children of her generation, Jaycee had been taught about stranger danger, but the initial approach seemed innocent enough that she did not immediately recognize the threat. Within seconds, the situation escalated from what seemed like a routine interaction with strangers to a violent kidnapping that would change everything. Garrido and Nancy quickly exited their vehicle, and before Jaycee could fully understand what was happening, they had grabbed her and forced her into their car. The entire abduction took less than 30 seconds, but it was long enough to destroy the sense of security that had defined her entire life. Carl Probyn heard the sound of tires squealing and looked out his window to see a grey car speeding away from the area where he had last seen Jaycee walking. His immediate instinct was that something was wrong, but his mind struggled to process the possibility that his stepdaughter had just been kidnapped. The idea that such a violent crime could happen in their peaceful mountain community seemed almost unthinkable. Carl immediately got in his car and attempted to follow the vehicle he had seen speeding away, but the kidnappers had too much of a head start and were already out of sight by the time he reached the main road. The feeling of helplessness that overwhelmed him in that moment was something he would carry with him for the rest of his life. The knowledge that he had been so close to preventing this tragedy but had been unable to act quickly enough to save Jaycee. The realization that Jaycee was truly missing hit the Probine family like a physical blow. Terry Probine's world collapsed in an instant as she learned that her daughter had been taken by strangers, and the quiet mountain community that had seemed so safe suddenly felt dangerous and unpredictable. The family immediately contacted the El Dorado County Sheriff's Office, beginning what would become one of the longest and most intensive missing child investigations in California history. The initial police response was immediate and comprehensive. Officers flooded the area around the Probine home, searching for any evidence of the kidnapping and interviewing neighbors who might have witnessed something suspicious. The FBI was called in to assist with the investigation, recognizing that a child abduction case required specialized expertise and resources. Carl Probine's eyewitness account of seeing a gray car speed away from the scene provided investigators with their first and most important lead. His description of the vehicle and the approximate time of the abduction gave law enforcement a starting point for their investigation, though the vast geographic area surrounding Lake Tahoe made the search incredibly challenging. The search for Jaycee quickly expanded beyond the immediate area of her abduction. Roadblocks were set up on major highways leading away from Lake Tahoe, and law enforcement agencies throughout Northern California were alerted to watch for the gray sedan that had been used in the kidnapping. Search teams combed through the dense forests and mountainous terrain around the lake, looking for any sign of Jaycee or her captors. The media response to Jaycee's disappearance was immediate and intense. Her photograph appeared on television screens and newspaper front pages throughout California and beyond. As news outlets recognized the compelling nature of the story, an innocent young girl snatched from a safe community in broad daylight, the coverage helped raise public awareness about the case, but it also brought unwanted attention to the Probine family during their darkest hour. Terry and Carl Probine made the difficult decision to appear at press conferences, pleading for their daughter's safe return and asking anyone with information to contact law enforcement. Their composure during these public appearances was remarkable, but those who knew them could see the devastating toll that Jaycee's disappearance was taking on the entire family. As days turned into weeks, the search for Jaycee expanded to include vast areas of wilderness throughout Northern California. Hundreds of volunteers joined professional search teams in combing through forests, canyons, and remote areas where a kidnapper might have taken a victim. Search dogs were brought in to follow any possible scent trails, and helicopters surveyed areas that were inaccessible on foot. Despite the massive effort, no trace of Jaycee was found in those initial searches. The lack of physical evidence or witnesses who had seen the gray sedan after the abduction left investigators with few concrete leads to pursue. They followed up on hundreds of tips from the public, interviewed known sex offenders in the region, and investigated anyone who had recent contact with the Probine family, but none of these efforts yielded breakthrough information. The case took on a life of its own in the media, with regular updates about the search efforts and analysis of the investigation's progress. Jaycee's face became familiar to millions of Americans who followed the story and hoped for her safe return. But the massive public attention also brought its own challenges for the family and investigators. Unknown to everyone searching for her, Jaycee was being held just a few hundred miles away in Antioch, California, in the hidden compound that Garrido had constructed behind his home. The location was close enough to major population centers that search teams came within miles of where she was being held, but Garrido's elaborate security measures and the hidden nature of the compound made detection virtually impossible. The conditions of Jaycee's captivity were beyond horrific. She was held in a soundproof shed where she was sexually assaulted daily and subjected to psychological torture designed to break her spirit and make her compliant. Garrido used a combination of physical intimidation, religious indoctrination, and isolation to maintain control over his captive, convincing her that escape was impossible and that her family had stopped looking for her. As months passed, the massive search effort gradually scaled back, though it never completely stopped. The Probine family continued to advocate for Jaycee and to keep her story in the public eye. But the reality was that without new leads or evidence, the investigation had reached a frustrating plateau. The first year of Jaycee's captivity was marked by her desperate attempts to maintain hope while adapting to the horrific reality of her situation. She was forced to participate in Garrido's twisted religious ceremonies, subjected to constant sexual abuse, and gradually indoctrinated into believing that her only chance of survival was to comply with his demands. When Jaycee became pregnant at age 13, the horror of her situation reached new depths. She was forced to give birth in the hidden compound without proper medical care, and the child, a daughter she named Angel, became both a source of love and an additional means of control for Garrido. The birth of her second daughter, Starlet, when Jaycee was 17, further complicated her situation and made escape seem even more impossible. The years passed with agonizing slowness for both Jaycee and her family. The Probyn family never gave up hope, but they also had to find ways to continue living while carrying the constant pain of not knowing what had happened to their daughter. They participated in annual vigils, worked with missing children organizations, and maintained a website dedicated to finding Jaycee, but the lack of new information was emotionally devastating. Meanwhile, Jaycee was growing from a child into a young woman in captivity, raising two daughters who knew nothing about the outside world. She found ways to educate herself and her children using materials that Garrido provided, and she developed an incredible strength and resilience that allowed her to survive psychologically even in the most impossible circumstances. The 18th year of Jaycee's captivity began with no indication that her ordeal was approaching an end. Garrido had become increasingly confident that he would never be caught, and he had begun taking greater risks, including bringing Jaycee and her daughters into more public settings. His overconfidence would ultimately prove to be his downfall, but neither he nor his victims had any way of knowing that their lives were about to change forever. August 24, 2009 started as a routine day for California parole officer Allie Jacobs as she prepared to conduct a standard visit to the home of Philip Garrido in Antioch. Garrido had been on parole for years following his release from federal prison for rape, and these regular check-ins were a standard part of the supervision process designed to ensure that sex offenders were complying with the terms of their release. Jacobs had been Garrido's parole officer for some time, and she was familiar with his eccentric behavior and his tendency to ramble about religious topics during their meetings. He lived in a modest home with his wife Nancy, and while his demeanor was often strange and unsettling, he had not given her any specific reasons to suspect that he was violating the terms of his parole. But on this particular visit, something was different. As Jacobs approached the Garrido property, she noticed two young girls playing in the backyard, children who had never been mentioned in any of Garrido's previous contacts with the parole office. The presence of these children immediately raised red flags, as registered sex offenders are typically prohibited from having unsupervised contact with minors. The girls appeared to be approximately 11 and 15 years old, with long blonde hair and features that suggested they might be sisters. They were playing quietly in the yard, but something about their behavior struck Jacobs as unusual. They seemed startled by her presence, as though they were not accustomed to seeing strangers, and they quickly moved away from the fence when they noticed her watching them. Jacobs knocked on the front door of the Garrido home, and when Philip answered, she immediately asked him about the children she had seen in the yard. Garrido's response was evasive and contradictory, initially claiming that the girls were visiting relatives, then changing his story to say they were neighborhood children who had wandered onto his property. The inconsistencies in Garrido's explanations, combined with his nervous demeanor and the unusual behavior of the children, convinced Jacobs that something was seriously wrong. She made the decision to call for backup and to conduct a more thorough investigation of the property, a choice that would ultimately change multiple lives forever. When additional law enforcement officers arrived at the scene, they began a systematic search of the Garrido property. What they discovered behind the house was beyond anything they could have imagined, a hidden compound consisting of multiple sheds, tents, and structures that had been carefully concealed from view with tarps, fences, and vegetation. The compound was like something out of a nightmare, with primitive living conditions that revealed the long-term nature of its construction. There were generators for electricity, makeshift bathroom facilities, and sleeping areas that suggested multiple people had been living in these hidden structures for an extended period. The sophistication of the concealment efforts indicated that this was not a temporary arrangement, but a permanent installation designed to keep its occupants hidden from the outside world. As officers searched the compound, they encountered a young woman who appeared to be in her late 20s, with long blonde hair and a submissive demeanor that suggested she had been living under someone else's complete control. When asked to identify herself, she initially gave a false name, but her nervous behavior and the circumstances of her discovery made it clear that she was not who she claimed to be. The breakthrough came when officers separated the woman from Garrido and Nancy, allowing them to question her privately about her identity and how she had come to be living in the hidden compound. Under gentle but persistent questioning, she finally revealed the truth that would shock the law enforcement community and capture the attention of the entire nation. Her name was Jaycee Dugard, and she had been kidnapped from South Lake Tahoe 18 years earlier when she was just 11 years old. The two young girls playing in the yard were her daughters, Angel and Starlet, who had been born during her captivity and had never experienced life outside the compound where they had been raised. The confirmation of Jaycee's identity sent shockwaves through the law enforcement community and triggered an immediate investigation into what would become one of the most significant kidnapping cases in American history. The realization that a child who had been missing for 18 years was still alive and that she had been held captive just a few hundred miles from where she was kidnapped seemed almost too incredible to believe. The arrest of Philip and Nancy Garrido proceeded quickly, with both suspects taken into custody on charges related to kidnapping, sexual assault, and a host of other serious crimes. The evidence against them was overwhelming, including Jaycee's identification of them as her captors and the physical evidence found at the compound that corroborated her account of 18 years of captivity. The news of Jaycee's discovery spread rapidly through the media, creating a sensation that rivaled the original coverage of her disappearance. The fact that she had been found alive after so many years was being hailed as a miracle, but the details of her captivity and the conditions under which she had been forced to live were almost too horrific for the public to comprehend. The reunion between Jaycee and her family took place under carefully controlled circumstances, with law enforcement and social services working together to ensure that the transition would be as smooth as possible for someone who had been cut off from the outside world for nearly 2 decades. The first moments of that reunion were private, allowing the family to process their emotions and begin to reconnect after 18 years of separation and grief. Terry Probyn later described the phone call informing her that Jaycee had been found alive as the most overwhelming moment of her life. After 18 years of not knowing whether her daughter was alive or dead, the news that she had not only survived but had 2 children of her own was almost too much to process emotionally. The medical examination of Jaycee and her daughters revealed the full extent of the trauma they had endured during their captivity. While they had not suffered severe physical injuries, the psychological damage from years of abuse and isolation was profound. The girls had never been to school, never received proper medical care, and had been completely cut off from the outside world throughout their entire lives. The investigation into the Garrido compound revealed evidence of sophisticated planning and long-term preparation for holding captives. The hidden structures had been built over many years, with multiple layers of concealment that made detection from outside the property nearly impossible. The discovery highlighted significant failures in the parole supervision system that had allowed such an elaborate criminal operation to continue undetected for so long. Parole officer Ali Jacobs was recognized as a hero for her alertness and decision to investigate the suspicious circumstances she had observed during her routine visit. Her actions demonstrated the crucial importance of thorough supervision of sex offenders and the need for parole officers to trust their instincts when something seems wrong. The case also raised important questions about how a registered sex offender had been able to construct such an elaborate compound and hold captives for 18 years without detection. The failures in the system that allowed this to happen led to significant reforms in parole supervision and monitoring of sex offenders throughout California and beyond. As Jaycee began the long process of readjusting to life outside of captivity, the world watched with a mixture of admiration for her survival and horror at what she had endured. Her story became a powerful reminder that hope should never be abandoned, even in cases where missing persons have been gone for many years. The discovery of Jaycee Dugard alive after 18 years of captivity was more than just the resolution of a missing person case. It was a testament to the incredible resilience of the human spirit and the importance of never giving up hope, even when circumstances seem hopeless. The process of readjusting to life after 18 years of captivity presented challenges that were unprecedented in the annals of criminal justice and psychology. Jaycee Dugard, now 29 years old, had to navigate the complex task of reintegrating into a world that had changed dramatically since her kidnapping, while simultaneously helping her 2 daughters, Angel, 15, and Starlet, 11, experience freedom for the first time in their lives. The initial weeks following their rescue were carefully managed by teams of psychologists, social workers, and law enforcement professionals who understood the delicate nature of their situation. Jaycee and her daughters were provided with specialized care designed to help them process their trauma while beginning to adapt to life outside the compound where they had been held for so many years. One of the most remarkable aspects of Jaycee's recovery was her incredible strength and resilience in the face of unimaginable trauma. Despite having endured 18 years of sexual abuse, psychological torture, and complete isolation from the outside world, she had somehow maintained her sanity and her capacity for love, as evidenced by the deep bond she had formed with her daughters and her determination to protect them throughout their captivity. The reunion with her family was both joyful and complicated, as 18 years of separation had created a gap that could not be bridged overnight. Terry Probine and Carl Probine had never stopped loving Jaycee, but they were now meeting a 29-year-old woman who had been transformed by experiences they could hardly comprehend. The 11-year-old girl they remembered had become a mother who had been forced to raise her children under the most horrific circumstances imaginable. Angel and Starlet faced their own unique challenges as they encountered the outside world for the first time. They had been raised in complete isolation, with no knowledge of modern technology, popular culture, or social norms. Simple experiences that other children took for granted, riding in a car, watching television, eating in a restaurant, were completely foreign to them and required careful introduction and explanation. The legal proceedings against Philip and Nancy Garrido moved forward with the overwhelming evidence of their guilt. But the process was complicated by the need to protect Jaycee and her daughters from additional trauma. Garrido ultimately pleaded guilty to kidnapping and sexual assault charges, receiving a sentence of 431 years to life in prison. Nancy Garrido received a sentence of 36 years to life for her role in the crimes. The plea agreements were controversial in some circles, with victims' rights advocates arguing that the sentences were insufficient given the magnitude of the crimes. However, the agreements spared Jaycee and her daughters from having to testify in a public trial, allowing them to focus on healing rather than reliving their trauma in front of strangers and media representatives. Jaycee's decision to gradually share her story with the public required tremendous courage and represented an important step in her healing process. In 2011, she published a memoir titled A Stolen Life, which provided her own account of the kidnapping, captivity, and recovery. The book became a bestseller and gave readers an unprecedented look into the mind of a long-term captivity survivor. The memoir revealed the incredible psychological strength that had allowed Jaycee to survive her ordeal while protecting her children. She described how she had found ways to educate herself and her daughters using limited resources, how she had maintained hope even in the darkest moments, and how she had developed strategies for psychological survival that allowed her to preserve her sanity and her humanity. Jaycee also became an advocate for missing children and long-term captivity survivors, working with law enforcement agencies and victim advocacy organizations to improve procedures for handling such cases. Her insights into the psychology of survival and the needs of recovering captives provided valuable guidance for professionals working with other victims of similar crimes. The establishment of the Jaycee Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to helping families of missing persons and survivors of abduction, represented Jaycee's commitment to using her experience to help others. The foundation provides support, resources, and advocacy for families dealing with the trauma of missing loved ones, drawing on Jaycee's unique understanding of both the victim and family perspectives. The case also led to significant reforms in the parole supervision system, particularly regarding the monitoring of sex offenders. The failures that allowed Garrido to construct his compound and hold captives for 18 years while under parole supervision prompted new protocols, increased funding for supervision programs, and enhanced training for parole officers. Angel and Starlet's adaptation to life outside captivity was a gradual process that required specialized educational and therapeutic support. They were provided with tutoring to help them catch up academically, social skills training to help them interact with peers, and ongoing counseling to help them process their unique childhood experiences. The girls' resilience and adaptability were remarkable, demonstrating the incredible capacity of young people to heal and grow even after the most traumatic experiences. Their mother's love and protection during their captivity had provided them with a foundation of security that proved crucial during their adjustment to freedom. Jaycee's story became the subject of numerous documentaries, books, and television programs, each helping to raise awareness about the realities of long-term captivity and the importance of never giving up hope in missing person cases. Her willingness to share her experience publicly helped other survivors feel less isolated and provided hope to families of missing persons. The case also highlighted the importance of alert and dedicated law enforcement officers in recovering missing persons. Parole officer Ali Jacobs's decision to investigate the suspicious circumstances she observed during her routine visit demonstrated how crucial it is for all law enforcement personnel to trust their instincts and thoroughly investigate anything that seems unusual. Perhaps most importantly, Jaycee's story demonstrated that healing and recovery are possible even after the most severe trauma. Her journey from victim to survivor to advocate showed that while trauma can have lasting effects, it does not have to define a person's entire life or prevent them from building meaningful relationships and contributing to their communities. The impact of her case extended far beyond her individual story to influence how society approaches missing person cases, victim support services, and the supervision of dangerous criminals. Her survival and recovery provided hope to countless families dealing with missing loved ones and inspired improvements in systems designed to protect vulnerable individuals. Today, Jaycee continues to focus on her family, her advocacy work, and her own ongoing healing process. She has chosen to live a relatively private life while remaining engaged in efforts to help other survivors and prevent similar crimes. Her daughters have grown into young women who, despite their traumatic childhood, have shown remarkable strength and resilience in building their own lives. The 18 years that Jaycee spent in captivity were a testament to the incredible strength of the human spirit and the power of hope to sustain life even in the darkest circumstances. Her survival was not just a physical miracle, it was proof that love, determination, and the will to live can triumph over even the most evil circumstances. Her story serves as a powerful reminder that recovery is possible, that families should never give up hope, and that even the most broken systems can be improved when people are willing to learn from tragedy and work together to prevent future victims. If you found Jaycee's incredible 18-year survival story as powerful and inspiring as we did, make sure to subscribe to Criminal Mind Cortex for more extraordinary true crime cases that showcase the amazing resilience of the human spirit. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest investigations into cases that prove hope, love, and determination can overcome even the most impossible circumstances.